Hey everybody. So, a movie called The Mind of Jake Paul came out earlier this month on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, it's an 8-part documentary centering on Shane Dawson, professional tenderman, trying to figure out through totally anecdotal means if Jake Paul is a sociopath. And you know what? I just want to start this off by saying something that I don't think will surprise you. Whatever else this documentary is about, it's not about sociopaths. At least not in any kind of scientific way. I mean, Shane Dawson seems like a nice enough guy, but he's not an expert in diagnosing sociopaths. And this lady that he got on to be an expert in diagnosing sociopaths, she's not an expert in diagnosing sociopaths. Like, I get that they both have seen Silence of the Lambs, and that she's looked through a copy of the DSM-5, like, I do give them credit for that, but that's obviously not good enough. This whole project is sensational and pseudoscientific, and there was never any chance we'd be able to come out of it saying, oh yeah, diagnostically speaking, Jake Paul's a sociopath. So let's say another kind of obvious thing, because I'm on a roll here. This documentary sure does care a lot about sociopaths. After all, the question of Jake Paul's sociopathy is at the center of this text. It's constantly returned to over the course of the series. And we, as an audience, are expected to assume that this avenue for discourse is a meaningful one. That is, if Jake Paul is a sociopath, it's supposed to mean one set of important things to us, and if he's not, it's supposed to mean another. Okay, considering these two claims, we're left with a bit of a question here, right? If this documentary is deeply concerned with sociopaths, but if its understanding of what a sociopath is doesn't really find its origin in science or psychology, then what is that word, that idea, doing in this movie? What story does the text perform with its use of sociopaths, and what meanings can we get out of that story? So that's what I'll be talking about today. And maybe this intro was a little on the dry side. I kinda had to shove a bunch of things in there real quick, but sociopathy, and the way that it's constructed within the mind of Jake Paul, that's not dry at all. In fact, it's really intricate and weird and just deeply thought-provoking. And if nothing else, that's what I want to convince you of in this video. So, without further ado, Part 1. Building a Sociopath. In the second episode of The Mind of Jake Paul, Shane Dawson sits down with therapist Katie Morton and offers us an explanation of sociopathy that informs this entire work. And for our purposes now, there are only a couple of really important characteristics that they attribute to sociopaths. The first is simple. Sociopaths are evil. Accompanied by horror movie-style edits and footage of Jake Paul acting like a dick, Katie Morton describes this group of people as fundamentally malignant. They lack all empathy, are predisposed toward violence, are incapable of experiencing positive emotions for themselves or others, and they have no desires besides the lust for power and money.
It's kind of like a robotic state of living, right? So
yeah, they're kind of like a robot.
At one point, Shane asks if sociopaths have a heart, and Katie responds, no, I don't think they do.
Do sociopaths have a heart?
I don't believe so.
Sociopaths are like evil, like really evil. And when we have this first characteristic, the second seems like a natural extension. Sociopaths are the other. As Katie describes this group of people, she uses words like creepy and gross.
It's really gross. It's just creepy.
Says they give us the heebie-jeebies and are just plain out unsettling to be around. And just look at Dawson's response to hearing about this diagnosis. He's constantly shuddering and talking about feeling ill.
Ooh, I'm feeling sick.
The point is clear. Sociopaths are people who we, Shane Dawson and the audience, are not, who we could never be, and who present some kind of threat to us, to the way we live our lives and understand things. The sociopath is, in essence, a monster, Somebody who comes to represent the things we fear and the things we hope we are not. And the thing is, on first blush, that doesn't seem like such a novel or groundbreaking idea, does it? I mean, as a society, we've been talking about monsters for a long time. Dracula and Frankenstein and zombies. And within this film, a sociopath is just another member of that group. A little more sciencey looking, maybe. I mean, a therapist comes on to legitimize the existence of these monsters, but still, that's what they are. It's nothing new. But now, let me introduce you to our monster. Or rather, the person whose monster status we have to figure out. My teachers never taught me that. How to deal with this or that. It's Jake Paul. It makes bad music, produces boring content, stood on a journalist's van one time. Jake Paul. That's weird, right? That's new. I mean, for one thing, just saying all this out loud, it feels like there's something very wrong here. Jake Paul is the one who might be evil, who might be the other? What has he ever done that could possibly earn him such a title? Act like the chief of the Dude Bros? Play some admittedly hardcore pranks? I'm just not seeing it. But more important for us, the use of monsters within fiction generally serves to embody some broad social anxiety, and to explain to us, metaphorically, why bad things happen in the world. Dracula is a symbol of sexual promiscuity and pathogen. Frankenstein represents science run amok and our concerns about agency. And considering that, it only makes sense to ask, what anxiety is it that Jake Paul could come to embody? What scary thing could framing him as a monster help us to explain? Well, let's get started. Part 2. Understanding a monster. So, given the specific properties of sociopaths within this film, I think the main benefit of positioning Jake Paul as a possible sociopath is that it can provide us some easy, kind of comforting answers to some very big, unnerving questions. By my estimation, there are really 2 of these questions, and in this section of the video, I'll go through both of them in some depth. Here's the first, and I think more obvious question. Why does it seem like our society so often vastly rewards people for giving us nothing of substance? Like, we live in a society that's structured around big, great ideas like individuality and freedom. And because our society has such lofty intentions, we want to think that it will produce good things, that the people doing the best work will go the most rewarded. But then we have Jake Paul, and his work isn't good. I mean, all he does is present a fake life, mix it up with incessant advertising for his brand that pretends to be real content, and then pawns that off to 8-year-olds who will get their parents to buy his stuff for them. I hope it's not controversial to say, that's not a noble pursuit, right? It's at best vacant and irritating, and at worst manipulative of little baby boys. But it works. Jake Paul is super famous, very successful, worth a lot of money. And how, as a culture, are we supposed to reconcile that fact with the idea that our society is, by design, a meritocracy? Well, the film presents one possible answer. What if Jake Paul is a monster? We can start to see this answer coming through the text when we look at just how important wealth and our observation of wealth is to this series. There are 3 mansions that we visit over the course of this documentary. Nick Crompton's, Alyssa Violet's, and of course, Jake Paul's. And in each of these cases, Shane spends a huge amount of time just processing the size and decadence of these homes.
So I was asking to go pee, like, oh, where's the bathroom? And she informed me that there's 3! It's crazy. This is like the other place we were at for Nick, but like on crack. Wow. Okay. Elevator house.
Through these observations, Dawson reproduces the sense that what we are experiencing here is the other. Who's financing your ownership of these massive structures?
We don't even pay for this, it's like our company.
Wait, who pays for this house?
Investors and all that.
Oh, it's a bunch of shady, nameless investors? What is this Team 10 thing, and how is it raking in so much money?
Yeah, it's confusing. I don't even I don't even know what it is.
Oh, you can't really give me an answer to that? Unlike the humble multimillionaire Shane Dawson, everything about Jake Paul's financial empire is presented as cryptic, abnormal, and strangely ominous. And it's through this symbolic language that Shane Dawson connects his understanding of the sociopath to the material conditions of the undeserving rich. That is to say, both Jake Paul and the massive house that he's somehow gotten for himself might represent a monster, might be an evil force that's gumming up the works and producing bad results. And if that is the case, it's not the system itself that's producing this flaw in our meritocracy, it's Jake Paul and people like Jake Paul. They are malformed, heartless creatures who don't care about doing good work, but who are ceaselessly dedicated to gaining power. And because of that, they are able to exploit the system and gain tremendous wealth. And while the existence of these people might be scary, at least we can know what we're looking for. At least we can deal with it and allow our society to go back to its normal, good functioning. But, okay. As much as this documentary does use Jake Paul's possible sociopathy to explain this social problem, there's another, more abstract, more sticky problem that it comes in to address. And here it is. What if watching media doesn't actually tell us anything about the people who make it? Like, we have this guy, right? Shane Dawson. And his entire body of work centers around creating the feeling of authenticity and connection with his audience. I haven't seen much of Dawson's work, but just in this documentary, he projects the image of somebody who wears his emotions on his sleeve, who's sincere and friendly, who's willing to talk about his issues. That's a large part of his appeal, right? But here's the problem. Jake Paul is right over there, on the exact same platform, pulling the exact same shtick. He also wears his emotions on his sleeve. He also acts nice and friendly. He also talks about his issues, his beef with other YouTubers. And that's a huge issue because everyone and their cousin has started to say that Jake Paul is a big liar. That in his real life, he's rude and mean and opportunistic. Nothing like what he presents in his videos. We want Shane Dawson to be real. Shane Dawson is popular because you think he's real. But how can we know he's real when another guy is saying the exact same things and everyone's saying he's totally fake? Well, here's a solution. What if Jake Paul is a monster? Returning to the second episode for a moment, we can see how Shane and Katie's understanding of sociopathy is deeply related to questions of artificiality and authenticity. Unlike regular people, like the empath Shane Dawson,
So an empath. I've heard that before.
Yeah.
a sociopath is someone whose disorder has rendered them unknowable, and who can only act from a place of phoniness. If they're nice to their fans, that's 'cause they're manipulating them. If they have a romantic relationship, they're doing that to keep up appearances. If it ever seems like they're showing compassion or vulnerability, that's because they want something from you.
They don't have emotions, so they wouldn't cry.
They might if they thought it made them fit in or get what they want because they're deceitful.
And we can see this idea expressed very clearly in the first episode of the show, where Shane Dawson talks to fellow YouTuber iNabbers and says this.
And that's the sociopath question, because if he is genuinely a sociopath, like a lot of people think, then Jake Paul is a character and it's a mask. and like
Yeah.
the real person none of us have seen, which is like one of the scariest things ever.
Here, the manner in which Jake Paul comes to represent the other isn't related to him doing bad things, but to the idea that his art may never reflect who he is when he takes off the mask. And yeah, it might be spooky to think about this kind of person, this figure of total inauthenticity, but as long as we have reason to believe that the vast majority of people aren't sociopaths, then I guess we can trust that in most cases, Shane's included, we can know an artist through their work. If the monster is fake, after all, everybody else is probably real. Part 3. Where is the monster? So, let me start this section with a little story. A kid wakes up from a nightmare, screaming because there might be a monster under his bed. And to be clear, from the kid's perspective, that theory actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, for one thing, when a room is dark, you don't really have access to a lot of sense data. You can't really see anything clearly, so there might very well be a monster hidden in the shadows somewhere. Just as important, the kid just woke up from a dream where the monster did exist. And who's to say that there is some firm separation between reality and dreams? If the monster existed before, then why can't he now? But then, of course, the dad comes in. And sure, he looks under the bed and checks in the closet, does the things the kid asks him to do, but he also tells the kid something. There is no monster in your room, and there won't ever be one. Go back to sleep. Now, maybe the kid doesn't believe him at first, but eventually he comes to the conclusion that his dad is right. He realizes that just because you can't see, that doesn't mean there's something in the dark. And just because you had a dream, that doesn't make it real. That's the thing about monsters, isn't it? When we realize they don't exist, the fears that created them are proven to be illogical. So, in the first half of this documentary, Shane Dawson is this child. He's plagued by all these scary questions, right? Why does society reward these douchebags who produce terrible work? How can we be sure that an artist is authentic? And, like the kid, he responds to these questions with the invocation of a monster. Sociopaths are why our meritocracy doesn't always work, and sociopaths are why some artists are fake, when others, like Shane, are real. It's sociopaths, monsters, Jake Paul. But in the second half of the documentary, this entire paradigm shifts. Shane transforms from being the kid waking up from a bad dream into being the father, telling his child that there is no monster under the bed. And that shift, monumental as it may seem, occurs in the blink of an eye. In the 6th episode of the series, after Shane and Katie spend a day just following around Jake and seeing what his normal life is like, they have this conversation.
So far, like,
Yeah.
I don't feel weird, I don't feel unsafe.
And just like he wasn't crazy with you in the car when you guys like drove off on that crazy ATV.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like fun, but it
No,
was like safe.
he was safe.
So, I don't know. And they have a dog they take care of, and that's a sweet dog.
And I like her.
I like her a lot.
Like, she's cool.
She's super nice. And just like, he cares for her, and like the way he interacts, it's really sweet.
And that's that, right? Jake was pretty cool to Shane, made him feel comfortable. And they have a dog that they treat well, and that's a nice dog. And Jake seems to have an actual relationship with Erica Costell. He's nice to her, they hold hands. What's more, in this episode and the one before it, Shane talks about how Jake is actually a lot like him.
You did that too?
Yeah. I knew I had so many things in common with you. I just had this weird, like, gut feeling.
They're both ambitious boys from broken families who had to work hard to get where they are. Around 3 hours after meeting Jake Paul, the entire narrative established by the first half of the documentary comes crashing down. There exists no horrific other here. There is no monster. And what happens when we realize a monster doesn't exist? Well, I said it before. The concerns he embodied are revealed to be irrational. As it turns out, we don't have to be worried about this question of authorial authenticity. I mean, yeah, not everything Jake does in his videos is real. The pranks are, in fact, staged. But now we're told, in no uncertain terms, this guy is, and can be, authentic on camera. He expresses real emotions about himself and his brother and his GF and his ex-GF. He's like Shane, right? And we know that Shane is an authentic YouTube presence, so Jake must be too. Or, as it turns out, we don't have to worry about who the system does and doesn't reward. Like, Jake Paul still produces garbage, and that is still a problem, but now that we know he's not a sociopath, the problem is understandable, non-threatening, always posed as a simple problem that can be rectified with a short explanation. Isn't it bad that 40% of the time in your videos is spent manipulating kids with ads that pretend to be real content? Oh, I mean, I don't think I'm manipulating kids. I mean, there's ads on SpongeBob, right? But I will think about that.
For people to say that I'm like trying to manipulate younger kids is it's like...
Isn't it bad that you actively profited from making a video where you made largely unfounded criminal accusations against people? You know what? You're right. I just wasn't thinking, man. I'm gonna delete that video right now. Just solve the problem right here. Good, no problemo. So, okay. Maybe the best work isn't always rewarded, but everyone here is a good faith actor, dealing with hard stuff, trying their best to produce better things. In short, the system is in the process of working itself out. I guess I should be happy about all that, you know? I mean, for one thing, it would have just been plain out irresponsible to end this documentary with the notion that Jake Paul can really be diagnosed as a sociopath by this random dude. I'm genuinely happy that that didn't happen. But more than that, when your dad comes in and tells you that there's nothing to be afraid of, that's supposed to comfort you, right? All those fears about darkness and your dreams, that can all go away when he says that. That should make us happy. Part 4. The Existential Horror of Shane Dawson. What does Shane want out of this documentary? Like, as a character? Well, there's a few things we could say, but I would suggest this. Shane wants to find something to be afraid of. He wants to find and isolate a monster, show that he's not like the monster, and explain some of the problems we have with that monster. But looking at Jake Paul, Shane is offered no monster, no sociopath who harms the system and exploits us. So instead of finding something to be scared about, Shane just finds an absence, a dead end. If Jake Paul is not unusual or monstrous, there's just nothing left to say. But what if that's not true? What if those questions that Shane Dawson's work brought out for us were pretty darn reasonable and important? And more importantly, what if they're problems that just can't be explained with a sociopath? Like, here's an idea. What if the mechanism that produces Jake Paul's just isn't very good at generating quality work? And not in the sense that some people making bad choices are causing problems with it that are working themselves out, but in the sense that this weird stuff is exactly what YouTube is asking for. What if Jake Paul essentially does what's wanted from him, and he's rewarded as a result? Maybe that is something to be worried about. Or, here's an idea. What if we actually can't know if an author's being authentic? And not in the sense that certain creators make it hard to tell sincerity from phoniness, but in the sense that this entire notion of authenticity that's so important to us is a contrivance. What if it's being manufactured and sold to us by Jake Paul and Shane Dawson and YouTube? Maybe that is a reasonable thing to talk about and be concerned with. Shane Dawson's entire explanatory model in this film, the thing he uses to answer his questions, is founded in this narrative of dysfunctionality. The horrible entity who doesn't work right and who destroys good things and who we cannot relate to. But what Dawson cannot or does not want to understand is that this story, Jake Paul's story, was never one of dysfunctionality. And if Jake Paul can come to embody any horror, it is the horror of a system that's working according to plan. So, that's all I had to say about Shane Dawson and Jake Paul. I hope you enjoyed that because it took so long. I don't even know why it took so long, but it was by far the hardest thing I've ever written. So, now it's time for my Patreon question of the video. My favorite time of the week. My name is Philip asks, is your name actually Joel? And approximately, how big are you? So, I feel like I've answered this question before, but whatever. My name isn't actually Joel, it's Henry, and I'm approximately like 150 pounds and 5 feet 10 inches tall. I don't know if that was too specific to be approximate. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. It's Shane Dawson, Jake Paul if you were watching. I really do hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.